Have you ever stopped to think what the size of a tsunami capable of covering the entire Earth with water would be? The answer will leave you speechless because it's nothing you would imagine. We're talking about one of the most catastrophic events ever recorded in human history. A flood so gigantic that it covered even the highest mountains on the planet. And before you think this is just another exaggerated biblical story with no basis in reality, hold that thought, because what's going to happen in the next few minutes will change the way you see Noah's flood, the force of nature, and even God's own power over creation. Don't leave now. But before diving into this whole story, I need to ask you a question that will seem strange at first. If you saw the waters beginning to rise around you, covering houses, buildings, mountains, how far do you think you'd have the courage to believe you would survive? Up to what height would you maintain hope? Most people, when they imagine this situation, go into despair just thinking about it. But Noah, a man who built a giant ark following God's orders, faced exactly that and saw with his own eyes the water cover the entire world. And this unwavering faith of his, my friend, will be the center of everything you're going to hear from here on out. Stay with me. This happened around the year 2300 before Christ, when humanity had already multiplied throughout the earth, but had also become completely corrupted. The Bible tells us in the book of Genesis chapter 7 that God opened the floodgates of heaven and the fountains of the great deep, and it rained on the earth 40 days and 40 nights without stopping. It was at this moment that history changed forever. Imagine you watching the rain fall uninterruptedly for more than a month, seeing the water level rise meter after meter, day after day, until it literally covered everything that exists. Most people would go into absolute panic. But Noah and his family were safe inside the ark, witnessing the exact fulfillment of the word that God had given. Don't turn away now. And you know what's most impressive about this whole story? The Bible doesn't just describe that it rained, it gives specific details about the height the waters reached. Genesis 7:20 says that the waters rose 15 cubits above the highest mountains. Converting this to modern measurements, we're talking about approximately 8 meters above the highest peaks on Earth. This isn't a vague narrative. This is a precise account that has been preserved for more than 4,000 years. 4,000 years, my friend. Imagine how many historical events were forgotten in all that time. How many civilizations disappeared without a trace. And this story is still here, still being studied, still challenging scientists and skeptics to this day. This doesn't happen by chance. But here's a myth that many people believe and that needs to be broken right now. Many people think the flood was just a heavy rain, like a regional flood that affected only part of the ancient world. This is not true at all. The Bible clearly shows that the waters covered all the earth, that all the mountains under all the heavens were covered, that all flesh that moved on the earth perished. We're not talking about a local flood. We're talking about a global event that completely reset life on the planet. The geological evidence of sedimentary layers on all continents, marine fossils found on mountaintops, and rock formations that could only be created by massive water movement, all of this points to the reality of this event. And this part of the story almost no one connects. But you'll understand better from here on out. And speaking of height and magnitude, this part deserves to be explored in more depth because it is one of the greatest demonstrations of God's absolute power over creation. Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world today, is 8,149 meters high. If the waters covered all the mountains with at least 6.8 meters above them, We're talking about a water level that reached approximately 8,856 meters above current sea level. 8,856 meters of water covering the entire planet. It's not a passing wave. It's not an ordinary tsunami. It's literally a global ocean suspended above everything that exists. Stop for a second and try to visualize this in your mind. Now let's talk about the volume of water needed to cause this entire flood, and the numbers will genuinely surprise you. The Earth's surface has approximately 510 million square kilometers. If we multiply this area by an average height of 8,956 meters of additional water, we're talking about an approximate volume of 4.5 billion cubic kilometers of water that would need to be added to the planet. To give you an idea, all current oceans together contain about 1.3 billion cubic kilometers of water. This means the flood required more than 3 times all the water that exists in the oceans today. The amount was absurd, and what's most impressive is that the Bible says this water came from both the rain and the fountains of the great deep, suggesting there was a massive geological rupture that released underground water on a planetary scale. And therefore, before getting into the scientific implications of all this, it's worth stopping for a second to absorb what this event means in practice. 40 days and 40 nights of continuous rain is not something modern meteorology can easily explain. The current Earth's atmosphere doesn't hold enough moisture to sustain precipitation of this type for so long. This suggests that the atmospheric and geological conditions of the pre-flood world were completely different from what we have today. Some biblical scholars believe there was a layer of water vapor suspended in the atmosphere that created a natural greenhouse effect, and that the collapse of this layer contributed to the intensity of the flood. Every drop that fell was part of a meticulously executed divine plan. And here comes the moment you've been waiting for since the beginning of this whole story. Let's compare Noah's flood with the largest tsunamis ever recorded by modern science and see what happens. The most devastating tsunami in recent history was the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004, which had waves up to 30 meters high and killed more than 230,000 people. 30 meters seems gigantic until you realize the flood reached almost 9,000 meters. This means the flood was approximately 300 times higher than the worst tsunami modern humanity has ever experienced. 300 times larger. And it wasn't a wave that passed, it was a water level that remained for more than 150 days, covering everything. But calm down, because here comes the part that will really leave you speechless. Don't leave now. And speaking of these numbers, it's impossible not to stop and think about what this represents when we look at our reality today. We watch on the news when a 10-meter tsunami devastates a coastal city, when floods of a few meters displace thousands of people, and we're shocked by the destruction. Now multiply this destruction by hundreds of times, extend it across the entire planet without exception, and maintain it for 5 consecutive months. Nothing remains. There's nowhere to run. There's no mountain high enough, no building strong enough, no technology that saves. The only possible salvation was exactly that wooden ark that everyone ridiculed while Noah was building it. This is a mirror we need to look at more carefully than we look at weather forecasts. Because calculating the height of a tsunami is relatively simple when you have scientific instruments and historical data, but understanding the magnitude of the divine judgment that the flood represents, that goes far beyond numbers and measurements. God wasn't just demonstrating power over nature, he was executing perfect justice over a humanity that had become completely corrupted. Genesis 6:5 says that every imagination of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. The flood wasn't a random natural catastrophe. It was a specific divine response to a specific moral condition. And this can't be measured in meters or cubic kilometers of water. And speaking of judgment and salvation, this is one of the most fascinating parts of the whole story, and it's worth exploring in all its details, because many people focus only on the destruction and forget about the preservation. While the waters destroyed everything around, the ark floated safely above all this devastation. The same water that brought death to some brought salvation to others. The difference wasn't in the ability to swim, in physical strength, or in any human ability. The difference was in having believed in God's word and having entered the provision he had prepared. 8 people were saved in that ark. Only 8, from a population that probably reached millions. This isn't a story about water. It's a story about choices. What makes this event so powerful is that it wasn't resolved with human engineering, with government planning, or with advanced technology. It was resolved with simple obedience to a clear divine instruction. Noah built the ark exactly as God commanded, entered it when God ordered, and left it only when he received permission. He didn't try to save himself independently. He completely trusted God's plan. And when the waters finally receded, when the earth dried, when life began again, it became clear that surviving the greatest disaster in human history had nothing to do with personal strength and everything to do with absolute faith in the one who has power over all waters. But here's another myth that circulates a lot out there, and that needs to be broken too. Many people think that after the flood, the earth returned exactly as it was before, that nothing changed permanently. This is completely false. The very geography of the planet was radically transformed by the flood. Geologists who study the Bible believe that before the flood, there was a different distribution of continents, that the mountains weren't as high and the oceans weren't as deep. The massive movement of water created the valleys, carved the canyons, formed the sedimentary layers we see today in rocks, and possibly even contributed to the separation of continents. The post-flood world was a geologically new planet. And this part of the story teaches us more than any calculation of water volume, and that's exactly why the flood impacts us so deeply even today. Not because it was a big flood, but because it was an event that simultaneously demonstrated God's absolute justice and absolute mercy. Justice because he didn't tolerate the evil that had taken over humanity. Mercy because he provided a way of escape for whoever wanted to accept it. The ark was open for anyone to enter, but only 8 people chose to believe. And this puts us face to face with a very uncomfortable reality. God always provides salvation, but not everyone chooses to accept it. The door was open during 120 years of construction. But when the day came that God closed the door, there was no way to enter anymore. And this leads us to a very important reflection about our own lives today. We live in a time when scientists warn about climate change, about rising sea levels, about extreme weather events becoming more frequent. We have satellites that monitor every centimeter of the planet. Tsunami warning systems that save thousands of lives. But technological preparedness is something completely different from spiritual preparedness. You can have the best forecasting system in the world and still not be ready for the final judgment that's coming. This is exactly what the flood teaches us, even after more than 4,000 years. Technology changed everything around, but the need for spiritual salvation remained exactly the same. And this is a truth that no warning system will be able to change. So thinking about everything we've talked about so far, here's the question that will keep echoing in your head for days on end. If a tsunami, almost 9,000 meters high, covered the entire Earth, and only 8 people were saved because they entered the ark while there was still time, what does this mean for you who are alive today, knowing that the Bible promises an even greater judgment in the future? The answer is simpler than it seems, but at the same time, it's deeper than anything you've ever heard before. Salvation isn't about escaping water. It's about entering the provision that God prepared through Jesus Christ. Just as the ark saved Noah from the flood, Christ saves those who believe in him from eternal judgment. And the door is still open, but it won't be forever. And that's exactly why this whole story matters so much to our current lives. Because it's not just a historical account kept in ancient books, it's a direct warning for our reality today. You live as if you had all the time in the world to decide about your spiritual life. You postpone the decision to follow Christ. You think you'll have other opportunities in the future, but just as Noah warned his contemporaries for 120 years, and no one believed until it was too late, the gospel message is being preached today, and many people continue to ignore it. And when the door closes, when the time of mercy ends, there will be no way to enter anymore. You'll think twice about your spiritual life after hearing this, or at least you should think. And you know what's most surprising about all this? It's that the plan of salvation hasn't changed at all, from Noah's time until today. What worked then still works now. Recognizing that there's a judgment coming, believing that God provided a way of escape, entering the provision he prepared before it's too late, living in holiness, knowing that time is limited. In these simple things is the answer to the greatest question humanity faces. The waters of the flood dried up, but the truth remained. Technology can protect us from many things, but only Christ can save us from what really matters. And this is both liberating and urgent, because it means the decision is yours, and the time is now. So if you stayed here until the end of this whole story, first of all, you deserve a heartfelt thank you, because most people don't have this patience and this ability to stay until the end. You were different, and that already puts you in a very special position. Now, if this story changed the way you see the flood, God's power, and the urgency of salvation, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Send it to a friend, a family member. Send it to anyone who will benefit from this. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, subscribe now, because there's much more content like this coming. The flood covered the entire earth more than 4,000 years ago, and only 8 were saved. But the door of salvation through Christ is still open today. And this decision of yours to subscribe and continue seeking the truth can change not only your life, but your entire eternal destiny.